they estimate that GPT software is able to save workers a significant amount of time completing a large share of their tasks.
They were talking about localizing your game as being one of the more powerful opportunities to maximize your game's reach.
Hi, Florian with SlaterPod here. High time we did a news show. How are you, Esther?
Very well, thanks.
Yeah, it's been a while. Busy last week. SlaterCon remote, 400 people. Great machine dubbing demo by AppTech. I really enjoyed that. And inspiring keynote by Veronique from Argos. And then, of course, a ton of good GPT discussion in the Intento panel. What's my point is that we were super busy the last couple of weeks. So had to pause the news pod. But yeah, here we are back. And had great week today as well. Big week for us. This week, we're going to send out our first Slater Toolbox email newsletter. We acquired the Toolbox journal from Joost Zetsche. Truly inspiring industry veteran that has been writing this for the newsletter for about 15 years now, and so we took it over, and we're going to send out the first edition under our brand in a few hours, I think. So it's coming out this week. Nearly 10,000 subscribers. So in total now, with our own newsletter, we have about 25,000 newsletter subscribers. So very exciting. And on the agenda today, we got GPT-4. Let's call it GPT-4 for now. It's kind of what everyone's talking about, large language models / GPT-4, but GPT-4 is the one that's kind of making most headlines. And let's have a big discussion about that. You brief us on Accolade and their new CEO. Then Google made a splash with some MT announcement for games, and then Disney is suspecting somebody in the translation workflow to have leaked a script of a movie, and they're chasing them. So, OpenAI has sorry, not everything's a launch. They just published, right? They
Published a study,
a research. I think they had a few other people from universities contributing to this. Looking at who's most exposed, what kind of jobs are most exposed to large language models. And they checked about 1,000 occupations, which is crazy, 1,000. So that's quite ambitious. They actually used human annotators and GPT-4 itself. So they used their own, what do you call it? Like they ate their own dog food. Yeah, the dog food metaphor there. So to apply to all the jobs categories coming from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, and then they published a paper called "An Early Look at the Labor Market Impact Potential of Large Language Models." All right, that seems very ambitious of a task. So they looked at to find out whether GPT or GPT-powered systems they looked at jobs where GPT or GPT-powered systems could reduce the workload by at least 50%, the time required for a human to complete a work-related task. And they found that about 19% of all U.S. workers might see at least that kind of meet that threshold of 50% of their task being impacted by GPT. So, a fifth of all U.S. workers would see 50% of their tasks impacted by LLMs, is what they're saying. They said that. So which one was the most likely impacted by LLMs, and which one was the most and least?
So up on the most likely impacted side was programming and language skills.
No surprise.
Which obviously is relevant for us. And then on the less likely impacted were occupations that require science skills and also critical thinking skills.
It's a lot to unpack here. Does that mean that if your job requires language skills, it doesn't require critical thinking skills?
Well, that was going to be my point. Yeah, arguably, translation, etc., requires quite a lot of critical thinking skills.
Sure. So, I mean, in a sense that they looked at 1,000 jobs and the framing. I'm sure if you actually kind of unpacked it and went into the full detail of the paper, it's more nuanced. But if you try to get the highlights, which you have to do in a podcast, it kind of boils it down into something that's a bit more simplistic. And then you have things like, language skills more impacted than critical thinking skills. To me, in a sense, it's almost one is a part of the other. Anyway, so the big news, of course, is that translators and interpreters scored among the top exposed categories. Okay, top exposed. But. There's so many buts coming. Practically speaking, the authors said that the results do not necessarily mean that, for example, translation interpreting tasks can be fully automated. Rather, the profession is simply among those that they estimate that GPT software is able to save workers a significant amount of time completing a large share of their tasks. Well, that's no surprise. I mean, that was the same before. I mean, the LSPs and everybody's been using MT forever.
I mean, I suppose they compared it to an all-human workflow, whereas really the translation job task as is already automated to a large extent, as we know.
Yeah, but that's almost like saying...
So now it's like, well, we're going to replace whatever the automation you're using with ChatGPT. Or are they examining the current state of translation as is automated and machine translation based, etc.? I don't know.
I mean, they specifically said it's going to get automated by large language models, right? And you could say, well, I mean, a narrow machine translation model is a narrow language model, not a large language model. It's a small language model, right? But it does the job. And I think, we're going to look at this later in this podcast. I think while these LLM systems are competitive for machine translation, they're not outperforming typically, right? So the narrow ones still are there, and they have been deployed in the translation workflow now for years. And we have the expert in the loop model. So I guess I don't see really the news here, like especially for kind of the traditional translation workflow. You could always argue, though, it's going to be like a paradigm change and everything's going to be completely different in the future. Could be, right? And we've had all these discussions about potentially translating. Instead of translating, you actually create a multilingual, content just from scratch, etc. We had a long discussion about that on SlaterCon Remote. But yeah, go ahead and read the paper if you really want to dive into. We had quite a good summary on Slater.com. So, but interestingly, translators and interpreters did actually not crack the top 5 vulnerable professions. The model instead named mathematicians and text preparers as the most successful, as susceptible to GPT's influence.
How many mathematicians are there as well? I mean, is that like... Are there a lot of mathematicians generally employed as mathematicians?
That's right. And then, like, you still need somebody to... Well, okay, I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to go and try to defend why mathematicians are less prone or less vulnerable to GPT models than OpenAI tends to think. Now, all right, Ramsey, who's we had on the pod and is actually now from time to time writing for us. He looked at some surprising new use cases of GPT-4, specifically GPT-4, which is OpenAI's large language model that came out. I signed up for the pro version. It's better than GPT 3.5, but it's not like I use it every day. But what did Ramsey say about what were some of the interesting new use cases for language?
Yeah, he identified a couple, but I think the two that are probably most relevant would be translation with visual context, and also image relevant transcription. So what does that mean? Translation with visual context basically means that GPT-4 can take into account the visual context surrounding a source text. So for example, if you've got parts of the sentence, parts of the phrase that are really dependent on the visual elements around it, that can help. And then secondly, image relevant transcription. So I suppose, if you've got a video presentation and also audio, if we're talking about transcription here, the slides that you use in your presentation, they could be visually described and then pass through GPT-4 as an input prompt. So that would then help inform the transcription. So I think there's a couple of use cases that would, be new and useful with GPT-4?
Multimodal is what they're talking about, right? So it's not just text input, it's image input, and the image input would inform the text output that you're asking. So yeah, I see, for example, translation with visual context potentially for game localization, or maybe even software localization, where you have like maybe you have
Like the
screenshots,
strings and
or
things like that.
yeah, you have just a visual input that would say, well, you're in the game, you're in this particular environment, and that would potentially inform that. It's very kind of frontier. So let's see how this gets productized in the next couple of years. Now, there's a lot of discussion around quality, just raw translation, machine translation quality of these large language models, right? Because everyone, when it came out, like including us, right, we just, oh, can you translate? Like, put in some, German and see how the output is. Quite good. It's actually very good. Of course, it's very slow, right? It's not like it doesn't have the microsecond response time. And actually, Martin from VMware pointed this out at SlateCon Remote that, like, it's good. The quality might be okay, but like I need huge volumes very quickly. And these large language models don't give me huge volumes quite quickly. I mean, if you punch it into GPT-4, it's probably, I think the limit is about 10 pages. I once had it try to summarize like a 15-page thing, and it said, well, that's too much text. So there's limitations. But everybody's trying to figure out how good are these large language models at machine translation. And we just came across a super interesting research paper by a group of researchers from University of Edinburgh, which is obviously one of the most famous one for machine translation, and also University of Lisbon. A couple of people from Unbabel were in this as well. And they looked at hallucinations in large multilingual translation models. I don't know. How do you summarize hallucination? Well, it just goes off.
Yeah, create something that's not there.
Yeah, create something that's not there. I guess that's a good way to put it. So very hard to summarize this paper in a podcast, but let me give it kind of just a high level what they were trying to answer, right? So they were saying, okay, these LLMs have demonstrated remarkable ability to translate between numerous languages, which makes them very interesting for real-world applications. But then, quote, however, when deployed in the wild, these models may generate hallucinated translations. And they say that has the potential to severely undermine user trust and raise safety concerns. Also, usually they said that in the past, literally in the past couple of months, probably weeks even, the focus was mostly on like high resource languages. And so they took a much broader spectrum. They said about 100 translation directions across various resource levels. We have the high resource language, mid resource, low resource language, and they went beyond the English-centric language pairs. So it seems to be a very broad study they conducted. And what they found was, and I'm sorry to the team if I'm butchering this, again, we're trying to write an article about it that's more informed than this, but they said that there was the emergence of toxicity in hallucinations. So like however you define toxicity, maybe like, swear words or inappropriate terms, etc. And then they also looked at that how fallback systems can mitigate hallucinations. So you're kind of building another layer on top of the raw output of these models, which I guess would be the way we...
Like a quality layer.
Yeah, quality layer. I guess that's the way this is going to go anyway. You have the base layer, and then you build another layer on top of this. But they also said that hallucinations can be sticky and difficult to reverse. And kindly, they open sourced their code, and they released over 1 million translation and detection results across several languages and language pairs. So anybody in academia or among one of these big tech companies can take the code, can take the translations, and run their own experiments. Yeah, so very interesting to see these early results of research there. Hey, and then there was a post, Lil published a press release on Slater about, let me pull this up here. It's a lot of comments on LinkedIn. They published a press release that with the headline, Lilt introduces contextual AI engine for translation, outperforms GPT-4. So cue comments on LinkedIn. A lot of people were pushing back. So, for example, Sheila Castillo from Dublin said, is there a link to the study? We don't know how the evaluation took place. I'd love to learn and replicate the results. That was actually the most pushback here, that's saying, hey, you're claiming you're outperforming GPT-4 or Google Translate. Can we see the data? Because as I just said with the previous paper, basically everything's open source. You can go in and replicate it. So if you go to the market and saying you're outperforming, you know, and then people are, well, this is a closed system. How do we know you really do? You know, it's big claims. Then let me see if there's any other interesting. There's a lot. People should head over to that post. But one thing I found very interesting was from. Sorry, I'm going off on a tangent, but I can't resist.
You can't stop yourself. Go for it.
Yeah, so Angelo Pasalacqua from Zing Global, I think he's also with Berg. He just had this really interesting comment, or funny comment. I wonder why knowledge of the entire internet is not adequate for MT.
That's the question.
You know the entire internet, and you've been, you know, reinforcement learning by human feedback and all of this stuff, but it's still not, you know, whatever level human or whatever we want to call it, right? That's really the $1 trillion question there from Angelo. So yeah, I mean, like if you look at the chart that Lil published there, it's like Google number 3, ChatGPT number 4, and then Lil coming top, and then some questions also like, well, why didn't you run this by? Why didn't you test on DeepL as well? So yeah, some pushback there. Cool. All right. So now let's close the GPT chapter and go to other news.
Other news. Yeah, we'll spend like 2/3 of our podcast talk about GPT-4 going forward, and now regular news has become other news.
It's other news. Hey, you know, why not?
In other news, yeah, okay. We'll go back to our other news, which is a couple of points. So we had the appointment of a new CEO at Accolade, one of the super agencies. Bertrand Gestalder, he has joined as the Chief Executive Officer in mid-March. He has 25 years of executive experience. He's been a CEO of, for example, an online real estate platform in France. This is a career first in that he's moving into language services, but he does have extensive experience in digital services. We spoke to him and he said he sees his role as helping to create a sustainable, stable atmosphere that enables people to think of change as a positive thing. This is sort of in the context of AI. He said, AI is the next frontier, so let's work with it and be the best at it. Let's not oppose it. Technology is a great exoskeleton for our people. So yeah, all the best to him in his role.
Imagine you join a company and then like, boom, there's this major train coming barreling down that, like, you know, you're not from the industry, and then you're coming into the industry. Sure, you have all the executive experience, you know how to run a large company, but then like there's all of these talks by these people that are industry insiders and have been for decades, and they're all, oh, this is all changing now we're going through this major disruption. Like, oh wow, okay, tell me more.
Yeah, it's a lot to get your head around, I think.
It's a lot to get your head around, yeah. But maybe not even the worst. Maybe it almost helps if you can kind of absorb everything almost from scratch and you're not beholden by any kind of legacy thinking. So yeah, good luck to Bertrand. Now, let's go to Google, and we had the headline that they encourage game developers to switch from human to machine translation. What's that about?
Well, so this is sort of on the back of an announcement that Google made at their Google for Games Developer Summit in mid-March. So they announced that developers now have access to free machine translation for Android apps. So the MT availability will start with 7 languages: Chinese, French, German, Indonesian, Japanese, Brazilian, Portuguese, and Spanish. It's available for early access only via an application. So you've got to actually apply to be able to access this. So, I mean, interestingly, at the summit, Google was talking about localizing your game. So, this being a game development summit, they were talking about localizing your game as being one of the more powerful opportunities to maximize your game's reach, including with Mandarin and Spanish-speaking players, kind of highlighting the importance of localizing games there generally. They also pointed out that the Play consoles or actually already offers a translation service, but it takes several days to turn around.
No kidding. Unless you have a great LSP, maybe several hours only.
Depending on who your LSP is. But so moving to the MT in Play Console, it uses Google Translate, maybe unsurprisingly, and they said the best-in-class transformer-based language models for quality. I suppose the interesting thing here is the kind of content that they're saying will be translated or can be translated using MT. So now, as you might expect, developers can upload strings from the app. They will select the target language. Google then applies the MT. Developers can download the results and use it in their app. So it will automatically translate, I think, store listings and product descriptions. But it can also translate in-app text using MT. So I think this one kind of an interesting example because maybe in-app text, things like UI content has typically been higher risk for MT, probably because of what we were talking about, the kind of lack of visual context. You've got these kind of short, abstract bits of text that actually you need to kind of know what the context around it is. To produce a good translation. So that's what they're doing over at Google for Games.
It was a presentation by, I think it was a product manager, senior product manager. So yeah, it's just, I do think the headline is justified that they really encourage developers now to use MT, and basically pointing out, oh, your traditional service, we have that too, but it takes several days. So if you want to go to market faster, why don't you use machine translation? So it seems like a big-ish deal that that they do this. Of course, in reality, things are moving slower, or it's more nuanced. But kind of on a PR level, this was a fairly important announcement, I think. Now, what's going on with Ant-Man? Do we have spoiler alerts? Ant-Man and the Wasp. How can this series run for such a long? Ant-Man seems like an interesting one-off, but then like it works, and then they produce like sequel upon sequel. So what's going on with Ant-Man, Esther?
Yeah. Well, no spoilers, but firstly because I haven't actually seen it. This Ant-Man
You
and the
have
Wasp
not?
Quantumania. I have not. But the story here that I think we're going to focus on is the fact that Disney's lawyers have actually filed a subpoena request. Wait, let me take a step back. Disney that owns Marvel, the movie Ant-Man, which we were just talking about. So Disney filed a subpoena request in early March to force Reddit to identify the person or people responsible for leaking the dialogue of the movie. There was a transcript in Portuguese that was leaked, and it was leaked on Reddit, and Disney now wants to identify and find out who is responsible. So they just... Yeah, by way of context, the movie was released in mid-February, but a couple of weeks before that, somebody in the Reddit community shared a Google Doc transcript of the dialogue in Portuguese. It was posted in the group called Marvel Studios Spoilers, under the handle MSS Mods, apparently.
I think Ant-Man wins. What do you think? Do you think Ant-Man wins, or do you think the Wasp kills Ant-Man?
I don't know.
I really suspect that Ant-Man. I think Ant-Man wins.
Ant-Man and the Wasp. I hope Ant-Man wins anyway. Have you seen it?
No, but I'm wild speculation that Ant-Man's gonna make it.
Okay, got it.
No, the bigger point is that I guess confidentiality really is a big deal here for media producers. We tend to think of confidentiality more in the context of, like, I don't know, legal documents, financial stuff like that, right? But for media localizers, this is a big deal too. Those are, kind of transcripts are trade secrets. So, And now they're asking Reddit to do what? Like, literally give the name? Do they know the name or?
I don't know. I mean, they're asking for as much information as Reddit has. So that could be names, contact information, IP addresses. But obviously that would basically override Reddit's kind of own policies about member privacy. So a little bit of a tricky one there, as to what will happen.
We need to follow up on this. I'm really curious. I'm really curious if they're really gonna have to release it. Yeah. All right, Ant-Man, good luck with the Wasp. We're gonna move on.
Wasp.
And yeah, and Quantum Mania. Maybe Quantum Mania means Ant-Man's getting even smaller, you know, in the quantum realm.
Maybe we should watch the film and then we wouldn't need to speculate about who wins and how small Ant-Man is.
I'll check it out. My kids will like to watch Ant-Man and the Wasp. Yeah. Cool. All right. See you soon.
Bye.